All right, welcome into the live HoosierIllustrated.com postgame wrap-up show for Indiana football as they're coming off a 52-14 victory to start off the season 4-0. Kyler Staley joining me from Kyler's Paradise, and John Oldham with you as well from In Touch with Indiana Sports. Kyler also from Talking About the Hoosiers. What are we thinking? I mean, there was a lot to take away, especially from the first half. One thing that really stood out, really, I feel like for most people from the get-go, was the fact that this was a lot more of a game in the early going than many people may have realized. But then as the game wore on, you got later into the second half, third and fourth quarter, Indiana did what Indiana appears to do under Curt Cignetti, which is execute on offense and take care of business and come away with another major high deficit victory, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think it shows that this Indiana team is not perfect, like a lot of people think that they may be. We'll talk about the defense. I thought, especially in the first half, I thought the Indiana defense was very, very lackluster, and that's probably even a better word to even describe it. I just didn't think that they were really ready today for a lot of the plays. I feel like they gave up a lot of big plays. Especially in the run game from Charlotte, I felt like they got a lot, and Charlotte's offensive line did a really good job early on. But I mean, early parts of the game, it almost looked like a true trap game in a lot of ways because it was 17-14 at one point. But then honestly, it's just Indiana actually, for the first time this season, had a really strong closing of the first half. And then after that, they just built on and built on. The offense, I thought, was fantastic the whole entire day. Obviously, you only punted, I think, once was the
and that was when Taven Jackson came into the game at that point.
Yeah, and obviously we can maybe talk about him a little bit, but it was a little shaky with him towards the end of the game there. But honestly, it was just another one of those games that we're kind of used to seeing so far with Indiana kind of in a cocky way. But they've taken care of business these first four games, just no question about it. I think the final stat was like they put up 202 points so far this season, which is insane. And then obviously they improved to 4-0. And then that's Cignetti. He set a record for the best start in any coach's first year at Indiana.
Which is crazy. And I know Cignetti mentioned in the post game that, a lot of that is thanks to the schedule that was put in front of him. But there have been many Indiana teams in the past, and really not in the so far distant past, that have had schedules that are maybe not 100% as manageable as this, but there were routes to be 4-0, maybe even as recently as the Kevin Wilson era, back whenever you had the high-powered offense there. But the difference between what went on during that regime versus now, at least in the early going, is that it seems you at least have a competent defense. We'll definitely see what the defense will look like when they get into the thick of Big Ten play beginning next week with Maryland. But these games where Indiana used to have the high-powered offenses used to be scores like 52-39, something like that. And it kind of looked like it was heading in that direction in the early point in this game. But it definitely appears that Indiana has, I don't want to call them a complete product because, again, it is way too early to tell maybe what the ceiling will be. I love to get high on the Indiana football program, but it's still hard to really make that leap to just full on expect them to be competing for the Big Ten championship. Maybe that ends up being the case. They do have that favorable schedule in front of them, but the road gets a lot more difficult from here on out. Beginning with Maryland next week, you have Northwestern on the road after that. And those are teams that I believe Indiana should find ways to win against. But will it be in the same dominant fashion that we've seen? Obviously, that remains to be the question moving forward to next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these next two games probably the most important stretch for this Indiana team so far this season. You win these two games, then you're really, really cooking. Obviously, you automatically get bowl eligibility. You improve to 6-0. But I'm really curious to see what this Indiana defense. Obviously they showed a lot of cracks in the armor this game, but I'm really curious to see what they do against a better quarterback. And that's no knock on the teams that they played. The quarterback play just hasn't been great for those first four games from the opposing team side. But I'm really curious to see when they start to play actual true legit Big Ten quarterbacks and see what they can do. Obviously, we've seen a lot of highlights from this Indiana defense. They've honestly been one of the stronger points of the season so far. But today it was just kind of like they just seemed like they weren't really ready for the game. And it took a few big plays for them to actually kind of wake up just a little bit. But obviously the offensive end, I mean, they were just perfect, throughout the whole entire game. It's just, Curtis Rourke, he's such a vet. It's really, really fun watching him play. And obviously he's shown that he's a little bit more mobile today as well. He had a couple of nice, keeps and, run up the middles and stuff, especially that quarterback keep where he scored. I think it was like a 12-yard rush TD. So, offensive side was great today. Defense got a lot to work on, and Cignetti obviously recognizes that.
I mentioned to Jeffrey the Greek on Friday's episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports that I had heard from a couple of different people that Curtis Rourke, at least from a game managing standpoint, reminds them of Tom Brady. And
Wow.
anytime you mention the name Tom Brady, when you're comparing anyone to him, you have to do so with a little bit of caution, of course, because you're talking about arguably, and maybe there's not even much of an argument there, probably the greatest quarterback in the history of the sport of football. But if we are talking about just a game managing standpoint, especially with the small sample size that we have on Curtis Rourke with Indiana, he's definitely lived up to at least that aspect of the comparison because he seems to make all the right decisions. I don't believe he's had a turnover yet this year, correct?
I don't think so. I can't think of an interception or not. So, I mean, he's been pretty perfect. But, I mean, in comparison to Tom Brady, I'm not ready to say that.
Exactly. It's very hard to even, again, I'm just mentioning what other people have told me. I wouldn't come up with that opinion myself.
Yeah.
But the fact that people are saying that, it does go to show that people are taking notice at his ability to just make the right decision for this Indiana team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, he's a vet, man. He's been around the block for a long time. He had a really good career at Ohio. He carries that over with Cignetti, who obviously has a very winning culture, no matter what program he's with. And then you pair that with a veteran quarterback that knows what it takes to win. I saw earlier, I think it was one of the commentators, might have been the color commentator, don't remember what his name was, but he said that, Rourke is a low blood pressure quarterback. And I thought that was perfect. I love that saying. I mean, he doesn't feel pressure. You know what a good comparison in that sense to me would be Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers is one of the best at quarterbacks when it comes to, not panicking or anything when the pocket collapses or anything like that. I'll say Curtis Rourke is similar to that. Obviously, he's not Aaron Rodgers. That'd be ridiculous to say.
You just hope it doesn't turn into the Aaron Rodgers that's, going out to do the darkness retreats and stuff like that.
Yeah, let's hope not, as that well. But obviously with Rourke, I mean, he knows what to make. He knows how to make plays and stuff like that. There were a few times this game where I think there was 3rd and long or something like that, and he just trusts his wide receivers to throw the ball up and make plays. I think anybody that looks at, this Indiana offense, any quarterback in the country, is like, man, they probably wish that they had, as much wide receiver depth as what they do, as what Indiana does, because, I mean, he's just got so many options that he can do with that. So Curtis Rourke has just been a highlight for this team, on the offensive side. It kind of sucks that Indiana is only going to get him for 1 year. But This was honestly probably the perfect quarterback you can get to transition into the Curt Cignetti era.
Another thing we talked about in previous post-game wrap-ups, penalties being an issue for Indiana. Not so much the case today. They only had 3 penalties for a total of 33 yards. Good to see them clean that up. And then obviously you already mentioned the ability to close out the second half. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that this was the earliest point in an Indiana football game this year where they faced some adversity. Usually that first point of adversity was that final drive of the second half, or the second quarter, I should say, for the opposing team. They got not really a punch to the gut. Maybe you can refer to it as that. They got an early test from Charlotte in the first and second quarter, which I feel like helped wake up the Indiana defense, especially as they were getting towards those waning minutes of the second quarter. And then they close out with a couple of touchdowns of their own, really seizing momentum as they got into the second half. And from there, they didn't look back.
No, I mean, and Cignetti said earlier this week, he said Charlotte's going to they're going to come in ready to play. For sure. Biff Poggi, he's a funny guy to look at. Oh, I mean, what he was wearing on the sidelines was cracking me up and everything.
Biff Poggi, man. I didn't even realize his last name was pronounced Poggi until today. I thought it was Biff Poggi. But yeah, that dude's a character.
That is a true quarterback or a true football coach if I've ever seen one. He reminds me of a Southern Indiana offensive line coach, somewhere on the high school level and stuff. But I mean, he got his guys ready to play today. I mean, they were a tough team, honestly. I mean, the score says otherwise, but they were pretty tough. They really, threw a lot of punches at Indiana, early on, and they were not afraid of the competition. whatsoever. So Indiana just obviously locked in. The defense got better. They cleaned up their silly mistakes that they were making. They woke up a little bit. Then the offensive side of the ball, they just kept throwing the ball down deep and just making plays. I can't remember what exactly Rourke finished with. I think it was around 250 yards, but
258. He was 16 for 20 with a touchdown. And
yeah,
then, a passing touchdown as well as a rushing touchdown.
Yeah, just absolutely incredible. In the run game, we haven't even talked about that really. They were spot on as well. But and obviously the game really turned around when the defensive side of the ball for Indiana just started to wake up a little bit. Aiden Fisher was really good today, I thought, as well. Obviously, he's their star of that defensive side. But it was just a dominant win, at the end of the day, and that's what we're kind of used to seeing.
Tana says, as someone who dresses like that on the daily, I stand with Biff. Yeah. And if Tanis, I don't know if you're a Southern Indiana guy yourself, as Kyler was just mentioning, but if you happen to be, then I guess you fit that description of the prototypical Biff Poggi.
So my question is, so Biff Poggi obviously wearing the cutoff and everything. What was that thing that was hanging down on his shirt? Did you notice that, John? That little box thing?
Little box. The one thing I noticed is he constantly had a towel around his neck. I guess, to keep his big old body cool in the Bloomington, Indiana heat. But I'm not sure what you're referring to with the box.
Yeah, I don't know. You have to look up pictures of it after the game, but there was some kind of box. I don't know if it had something to do with his headset or what, but it was cracking me up because his chest hair is just coming out, because of that. So, but no, he was he's a true football coach. Signetti, we call him kind of a football robot, from an IQ standpoint, but Poggi, he's just, we're here to play football and that's what we're going to do.
Moving forward to Maryland, and I kind of want to talk about the crowd aspect a little bit, not necessarily because I was disappointed, because I do understand kind of the circumstances of the game today. Early on, it looked like it was going to be a very disappointing crowd at Memorial Stadium, but it ended up being your typical noon kickoff in Bloomington. The tailgaters kind of slowly making their way into the stadium after the game already begins, and you ended up filling out the entirety of the building fairly well. But then you have your traditional, whatever percentage of the fans leaving at halftime, and then by the fourth quarter, I would say the percentage, maybe 15, 20% full at the most, Kyler? Was that be a good estimate maybe there?
Yeah, I would say so. And then obviously, the weather today, it was pretty hot out. It's September. It's going to be hot in Indiana.
Yeah.
And then obviously you look at the opponent aspect, it was expected Indiana was going to take care of business with Charlotte, which they obviously did. So, but I think moving forward, I think you're going to start seeing a very, very packed Memorial Stadium.
I would love to see the Indiana University, the administration, they really need to make an effort to make sure that they have this. I know it's not the Big Ten opener, but it is your home Big Ten opener at this point. Make sure you have that stadium as packed as possible next week, because you have a 4-0 team for the first time. And I don't remember, I know it's the first 4-0 start for a head coach. I don't know how long it's been since Indiana, the program itself, was 4-0. I do remember seeing it was the fourth time since 1990. It doesn't do a lot of help when you're figuring out the most recent 4-0 start. But obviously it would be a very good look, especially when you've had some very, stereotypical Indiana Hoosier football crowds to open the season. It'd be nice to see that aspect of things really take a step forward when Maryland comes to town next week.
Yeah, heading into next week, you mentioned it. The administration just got to do something to try to make sure, there's a lot of fans there.
Give them an extra incentive. It doesn't have to be a lot, but, just give that extra little bit. And I hate it. Usually ends up being a bonus for Indiana basketball in some way, shape, or form. Like you get priority for something related to Indiana basketball. But anything to get that stadium filled, the Indiana administration needs to do that.
Hey, do whatever you got to do to get that filled, because I do think, next week is the biggest game of the season for Indiana. It feels like we say that about every game so far this year, but it obviously is. It's the biggest game. So if Indiana can beat Maryland, I think that's going to wake up, the national media a little bit about Indiana, and it's just going to, get fans more and more excited about this team. Winning cures a lot of things. This Indiana fan base is not used to a football program that knows how to win. So this has been fun for them, for the people that have been on the Signetti train, ever since the start of it. You got to start, rewarding the players, the staff, by showing up to the games and staying there the full time. I think next week, the weather's going to be a little bit cooler. It's a Big Ten opponent. It's a better opponent than what we've seen the first 4 games. I think there's going to be a lot of people at the Rock. So just continue to build momentum, continue to win. And then obviously the fans are just going to keep coming and coming.
Man, I had another thought that I wanted to get to before we wrap things up, and I wish it would come back into my brain before I hit end stream here in a few
What
minutes. But
I got a question for you. What do you think about Taven Jackson? What did he do today?
I tell you what, so the last couple of times that we saw him, he looked very impressive, especially in the Western Illinois game. He had a lot of opportunities to make some plays there, and he had several opportunities today. There were moments where he looked the part in a way. He didn't complete anything that really could have been, game changing. He had a couple of attempts at Donovan McCulley that ended up not working out. But overall, he definitely had a lot more pressure on him than I imagined him having. I don't know if that's more so due to him or the offensive line having some issues, or maybe Charlotte still having their ones in. Not 100% sure. But I would say compared to other times where we've seen Taven Jackson, this is definitely, I don't want to call it a regression. That seems like I'm being a little harsh. But he definitely didn't look as poised as he did in recent performances.
Yeah, I think right now he's just a very boom or bust type of quarterback. He's gonna make some big plays. He made a couple today. I think there was one to Miles Cross, if I remember correctly. That was like a fourth down. So he made some big plays, but obviously his big thing is that he wants to be very mobile. He wants to use his feet, and I think that's what he's best at. But they're trying to work on making him more of a pocket passer and just making him a more complete quarterback. I think decision making is going to be big for him next year. Consistency is going to be big for him. But for the things that you see, the good things that you see out of Taven Jackson when he is on the field, I think he is one of the more high upside quarterbacks that are going to be in the Big Ten next year, because this is going to be his team. Depending on what they do in the transfer portal, they bring in another quarterback. You just don't know. But from all the roads, it's kind of leading towards Taven Jackson, being the quarterback next year of this team. So consistency is going to be big for him. Being a more complete quarterback is going to be big for him. But I mean, it's good that he's getting playing time. Indiana's blowing teams out. I don't know how much more playing time you're going to see out of him for the rest of the season. It'd have to be either a blowout, either way to see him, I think, or unless an injury happens, which you pray that doesn't happen. But very boomer bust right now, but he's got a lot of upside, I will say.
Pete mentions they should donate 5,000 to 10,000 tickets to any charity that will show up, Boys and Girls Club, etc., or also offer free beer. Man, free beer, that's a bit of a stretch. That's the thing with free beer. I think that'd be harder keeping people in the stands.
Yes,
they'd be behind the
absolutely.
concession stands, heading back out to the tailgate fields. That could almost be a little more problematic.
I don't think you realize how much money they would lose if they had free beer. That's a lot of money.
You'd have to have a cutoff. It'd have to be more of a voucher of some sort, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, at the football games. I don't know when they officially cut off beer sales. I feel like it's probably at the end of the third quarter. But I know at the basketball games, they cut it off with 10 minutes left. And it's always funny every single game that the basketball side, they always boo every time they announce that beer is cut off at 10 minutes. So,
man.
But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, obviously next week is the big one, right?
It is the big one.
They got to win that. They got to win that game to really, wake up the national media.
And that reminds me, before I lose my train of thought, this is what I forgot earlier. This is the game where I feel like if Indiana can get to 5-0, beat Maryland, at that point, I think you'll see Indiana jump into the top 25 if they can, I don't want to say take care of business, but if they can show that they are the superior team to Maryland and they can win. I mean, it doesn't have to be 52-14 style, but if you look like the better team from start to finish, I think at that point, you'll see Indiana make their first entrance into the AP top 25.
Which would be crazy to think because we haven't seen that in nearly 4 years. So
it's been a bit. It's been a bit.
Exactly. So, I mean, I agree with you. They're not going to be in the top 25, after this win, unless something crazy happens that we're just kind of forgetting, towards the end of the top 20 or the end of the top 25 today. But I mean, they're definitely going to be probably in that 30 range. I would expect next week, they're going to get some votes. They're going to get a lot more votes than what they got. I think last week they got 13. I expect them to get a few more there, but you win, especially you win against Maryland, you win on the road against Northwestern. There's no reason why this Indiana team can't be a top 25 team in the country.
Apologies for laughing while you were making your point, but I looked down at this comment. Pete had a follow-up. He said, NIL beer delivered to the seat. That's an idea. That's for sure. So let's go ahead and wrap up today's edition of the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show for Indiana football. We'll be back, I think, in some way, shape, or form to do this next week. I know that I will not be present, unfortunately, for Indiana versus Maryland. I'll be at one of my favorite events of the year, Louder Than Life, down in Louisville, Kentucky, on a Saturday night. So I'll be keeping up in spirit on my phone. Hopefully, I don't have anything to be upset about, because last year when I went to Louder Than Life, that was the infamous Akron game in overtime. And that was something that I was happily or I guess what's the best way to phrase it? I was just happy I wasn't watching. I guess that's the best way to say it. So hopefully, hoping for a better result next
Let's
week.
say this, John, before we wrap up here. If Indiana loses to Maryland next week, I'm gonna have to tell you this: you may not need to go to Louderman Live ever again, because that sounds like that's bad luck.
Exactly. I'm hoping that's not the case, but if we do a post-game wrap-up show, I'll be sure to let you know throughout the week on In Touch with Indiana Sports what that will look like and who will be taking care of that for us. But as always, check into In Touch with Indiana Sports Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays on HoosierIllustrated.com. Also talking about the Hoosiers every Thursday with Drew and Kyler. And be sure to stay tuned to everything that will be posted later this afternoon from the post game of Indiana versus Charlotte. So anything I'm forgetting there, Kyler?
Nope, that's it. You know, we got a lot of basketball stuff too. So obviously Indiana fans are huge basketball fans. So check all that stuff out as well. But a lot of stuff at HoosierIllustrated.com. And make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page. We really appreciate it.
Please do that. That's right. So until next time, this has been another edition of the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show.